Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This is what Job always did. So we have this story of a man named Job, who's blameless, he's upright, and he is excessively rich. I estimate that this man was the equivalent of a high school nerd turned billionaire. Maybe something like Bill Gates, for example. But within the next 14 verses, Job's life is completely shattered. Satan and God were discussing in the heavenly realms, and Satan says to God that his faithful servant Job has never truly been tested. Satan explains that faithful Job has experienced blessing for doing diligence with his burnt offerings and confessing his sin, but he has a hedge around him. In other words, he's only so faithful and blameless because his life hasn't seen hardship. Not at all. Okay, you may test him, but spare his life. So then Job loses his herds of sheep and his camels and his cattle and all of his children. All of his children die in a disaster. And then he finally loses his health and he's struck with sores from his head right down to his feet. On a scale of 1 to 10, the situation looks not good. At a time such as this, the comfort and consolation of a wife would be helpful. But no, Job's wife betrays him and says, "Curse God and die." That was lovely. The remaining chapters of Job, they're all about his struggle, his ongoing tug-of-war with God about what's going on, because this is unjust for him. Often things happen in your life and mine, and we say, "Why me? Why did you do this to me, God?" Sometimes you say, "Why not her? She deserves it, not me." So, I've given you some context on a man named Job. Scazzero says that Job's story is perfect in a sense of portraying what to do when you grieve. And so let's go into Scazzero's book and his 5 principles, and we're going to explore what those principles are through this man's life. And I'm going to sweep through Job's life, and I'm going to touch in on parts of it. If you sat down this afternoon to read Job, because it might be really helpful for you, you could do it in about 2 hours and you can get the whole picture. All right, Scazzero's first point about loss is that we need to pay attention to our grief. Now, if you're a little inquisitive here, you might be saying, well, how did Job respond? In paying attention to his grief, Job starts initially where most of us spiritual people do. He tore his robe and then he shaved his head and he fell on the ground and he worshipped. But after his physical illness, things changed. He chose to sit in silence for 7 days. He had 3 friends that came to visit him, and they sat with him in that silence for 7 days. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a woman, and I can't sit an hour in silence with 3 women. I think this is a cultural thing. I think this is something that people of the East did, is they chose to go into a mode of silence. But after that silence, things were brooding in his heart, and he was ready to let God have it. And I'm going to talk to you from Job 7 here. Listen to his heart. Therefore, I will not restrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. Do you detect any honesty in what he's saying there? Like, there's no mind games going on here. There's no spiritualizing techniques going on. This man is ready to waffle through 38 chapters, and he's gonna take all these logic arguments up against God, and they're gonna fail. because this was an unjust loss. There's no explanation for what's going on. So that's a picture of Job, a small picture of Job in his grief. So what do when you grieve? Because everyone grieves. It's just a question of how you do it. Far too many of us fall into patterns, and it can be very subliminal, where we start to medicate that pain, and we play head games rather than paying attention to what's going on in our heart. Do you question the voice of your heart? In Waking the Dead, John Eldridge says, "The heart lives in a far more bloody and magnificent reality of living and dying, of loving and hating. Those who live from the mind are detached from life." Have you detached from life to protect yourself? Later he says, "Those who live from the mind shed few tears." This modern age provides ample opportunity for both you and I to press pause on what's going on in the heart. We can choose to pick up drinking, drug addictions, shopping till you drop, gambling, overeating, skipping meals, zoning out in front of the TV, internet gaming, pornography, excessive attention to exercise. These things are just a few examples. And you know, even good activities require that we're careful, because there's places within our hearts that only God can heal, and no diversion is going to address it. So how about this? Shed honest tears. Big girls and big boys should have tears about the things that hurt. An honest grief will validate your heart. Some of you here need to validate your heart. You've squashed it by trying to keep going forward. I would advise that you pick up a pen and journal. Go for long walks in nature. Write poetry. Serve the poor. Play blues on the guitar until your fingers bleed. Because a grief contained will eventually break the container. Grief flowing freely, like tears that flow down our cheeks, is a grief that can be healed. Maybe it's hard. You can't find the time. You've got 3 young children to run after, and you can't find the time. You're just too busy. But it would be worth it. I delayed the grief as a teenager until the days when I had my children. It's not to say that I didn't cry at the funeral, but I wasn't taking it in, and I delayed that grief for 10 years. Scazzero's second stage is called waiting in a time of a confusing in-between. And this is kind of a phase where there's a lot of silence, there's searching, and you're choosing strategies to cope. Job experienced frustrating silence from God. He kept his communication lines open for 38 chapters in that book, and there wasn't a word from God, not one. He searches for God himself. In chapter 9, verse 11, he says, "Look, he passes by me. I do not see him." This is very confusing. This is a contradictory faith experience for a man who was so close to God. And it's not uncommon for you and I to experience some kind of silence, or for our reception to be off after we've experienced a deep loss with God. When the initial tragedy subsides and all the people fade away, there's just you. In times of grief, you know, there's people that do try to come around you, and they try to get you through this, and they try to offer strategies for you. Job had 3 friends sit with him for 38 chapters. Let's take a look at that just for a minute.